to the Joyful House, and welcome to Once Upon a Storybook. Today we are continuing the Anne of Green Gables series. We are on book number 5, Anne's House of Dreams, and today we're going to look at chapter 15 and 16. Chapter 15 is titled Christmas at Four Winds, and chapter 16 is New Year's Eve at the Light. So if you are ready for this storybook adventure, sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Chapter 15, Christmas at Four Winds. At first, Anne and Gilbert talked of going home to Avonlea for Christmas, but eventually they decided to stay in Four Winds. I want to spend the very first Christmas of our life together in our own home, decreed Anne. So it fell out that Marilla and Mrs. Rachel Lynde and the twins came to the Four Winds for Christmas. Marilla had the face of a woman who had circumnavigated the globe. She had never been 60 miles away from home before, and had never eaten a Christmas dinner anywhere save at Green Gables. Mrs. Rachel had made and brought with her an enormous plum pudding. Nothing could have convinced Miss Rachel that a college graduate of the younger generation could make a Christmas plum pudding properly, but she bestowed approval on Anne's house. "Anne's a good housekeeper," she said to Marilla in the spare room the night of their arrival. "I've looked into her bread box and her scrap pail. I always judge a housekeeper by those, that's what. There's nothing in the pail that shouldn't have been thrown away, and no stale pieces in the bread box. Of course, she was trained up by you, but then she went to college afterwards. I notice she's got my tobacco-striped quilt on the bed here, and that big round braided mat of yours before her living room fire. It makes me feel right at home." Anne's first Christmas in her own house was as delightful as she could have wished. The day was fine and bright. The first skim of snow had fallen on Christmas Eve and made the world beautiful. The harbor was still open and glittering. Captain Jim and Miss Cornelia came to dinner. Leslie and Dick had been invited, but Leslie made excuse. They always went to her Uncle Isaac's West for Christmas, she said. She'd rather have it so, Miss Cornelia told Anne. She can't bear taking Dick where there are strangers. Christmas is always a hard time for Leslie. She and her father used to make a lot of it. Miss Cornelia and Mrs. Rachel did not take a very violent fancy to each other. Two suns hold not their course in one spear. But they did not clash at all, for Miss Rachel was in the kitchen helping Anne and Marilla with the dinner, and it fell to Gilbert to entertain Captain Jim and Miss Cornelia, or rather to be entertained by them. For a dialogue between those two old friends and antagonists was assuredly never dull. "It's many a year since there was a Christmas dinner here, Mistress Blythe," said Captain Jim. "Miss Russell always went to her friends in town for Christmas, but I was here to the first Christmas dinner that was ever eaten in this house, and the schoolmaster's bride cooked it. That was 60 years ago today. Mistress Blythe, and a day very like this, just enough snow to make the hills white, and the harbor as blue as June. I was only a lad, and I've never been invited out to dinner before, and I was too shy to eat enough. I got all over that." "Most men do," said Miss Cornelia, sewing furiously. Miss Cornelia was not going to sit with idle hands even on Christmas. Babies come without any consideration for holidays, and there was some expected in a poverty-stricken household at Glen St. Mary. Miss Cornelia had sent that household a substantial dinner for its little swarm, and so meant to eat her own with a comfortable conscience. "Well, you know, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, Cornelia," explained Captain Jim. "I believe you, when he has a heart," retorted Miss Cornelia. "I suppose that's why so many women kill themselves cooking, just as poor Amelia Baxter did. She died last Christmas morning, and she said it was the first Christmas since she was married that she didn't have to cook a big 20-plate dinner. It must have been a real pleasant change for her. Well, she's been dead a year, so you'll soon hear of Horace Baxter taking notice." "I heard he was taking notice already," said Captain Jim, winking at Gilbert. "Wasn't he up to your place one Sunday lately with his funeral blacks on and a boiled collar?" "No, he wasn't, and he needn't come neither. I could have had him long ago when he was fresh. I don't want any second-hand goods, believe me. As for Horace Baxter, he was in financial difficulties a year ago last summer, and he prayed to the Lord for help. And when his wife died and he got her life insurance, he said he believed it was an answer to his prayer. Wasn't that like a man?" "Have you really proof that he said that, Cornelia?" "I have the Methodist minister's word for it, if you call that proof. Robert Baxter told the same thing too, but I admit that isn't evidence. Robert Baxter isn't often known to tell the truth." Come, Cornelia. I think he generally tells the truth, but he changes his opinion so often it sometimes sounds as if he didn't. It sounds like it mighty often, believe me. But trust one man to excuse another. I have no use for Robert Baxter. He turned Methodist just because the Presbyterian choir happened to be singing 'Behold the Bridegroom Cometh' for a collection piece when him and Margaret walked up the aisle the Sunday after they were married. Served him right for being late. He always insisted the choir did it on purpose to insult him, as if he was of that much importance. But that family always thought they were much bigger potatoes than they really were. His brother Eliphalet imagined the devil was always at his elbow, and I never believed the devil wasted that much time on him." I don't know," said Captain Jim thoughtfully. "Eliphalet Baxter lived too much alone, hadn't even a cat or dog to keep him human. When a man is alone, he's mighty apt to be with the devil, if he ain't with God. He has to choose which company he'll keep, and I reckon if the devil always was at Life Baxter's elbow, it must have been because Life liked to have him there." "Man-like," said Miss Cornelia, and subsided into silence over a complicated arrangement of tucks until Captain Jim deliberately stirred her up again by remarking in a casual way, "I was up to the Methodist church last Sunday morning." "You better have been home reading your Bible," was Miss Cornelia's retort. "Come now, Cornelia, I can't see any harm in going to the Methodist church when there's no preaching in your own. I've been a Presbyterian for 26 years, and it isn't likely that my theology will hoist anchor at this late day." "It's setting a bad example," said Miss Cornelia grimly. "Besides," continued wicked Captain Jim, "I wanted to hear some good singing. The Methodists have a good choir, and you can't deny that, Cornelia. That singing in our church is awful since they split in the choir." "What if the singing isn't good? They're doing their best, and God sees no difference between the voice of a crow and the voice of a nightingale." Come, Cornelia," said Captain Jim mildly. "I've a better opinion of the Almighty's ear for music than that." "What caused the trouble in our choir?" asked Gilbert, who was suffering from suppressed laughter. "It dates back to the new church 3 years ago," answered Captain Jim. "We had a fearful time over the building of that church. Fell out over the question of a new site. 2 sites wasn't more than 200 yards apart, but you'd have thought there was 1,000 by the bitterness of that fight. We was split up into 3 factions. One wanted the east site, one the south, and one held to the old. It was fought out in bed and at board and in church and at market. All the old scandals of 3 generations were dragged out of their graves and aired. 3 matches was broken up by it, and the meeting we had to try to settle the question. Cornelia, will you ever forget the one when old Luther Burns got up and made a speech? He stated his opinions forcibly." "Call a spade, Captain. You mean he got red mad and raked them all, fore and aft. They deserved it too, a pack of incapables. But what would you expect of a committee of men? That building committee had 27 meetings, and at the end of the 27th weren't no nearer having a church than what they begun. Not so near, for a fact, for in one fit of hurrying things along, they'd gone to work and tore the old church down, so there we were, without a church. and no place but the hall to worship in. The Methodists offered us their church, Cornelia. The Glen St. Mary Church wouldn't have been built to this day, went on Miss Cornelia, ignoring Captain Jim, if we women hadn't just started in and took charge. We said we meant to have a church if the men meant to quarrel till doomsday, and we were tired of being a laughingstock for the Methodists. We held one meeting and elected a committee and conveys for subscriptions. We got them too. When any of the men tried to sass us, we told them they'd tried for almost 2 years to build a church, and it was our turn now. We shut them up close, believe me, and in 6 months we had our church. Of course, when the men saw we were determined, they stopped fighting and went to work, manlike, as soon as they saw they had to, or quit bossing. Oh, women can't preach or be elders, but they can build churches and they can scare up the money for them. The Methodists allowed women to preach, said Captain Jim. Miss Cornelia glared at him. I never said the Methodists hadn't common sense, Captain. What I said is, I doubt if they have much religion. I suppose you're in favor of votes for women, Miss Cornelia, said Gilbert. I'm not hankering after the vote, believe me, said Miss Cornelia scornfully. I know what it is to clean up after the men, but some of these days, when the men realize that they've got the world into a mess they can't get it out of, they'll be glad to give us the vote and shoulder their troubles over onto us. That's their scheme. Oh, it's well that women are patient, believe me. What about Job? Suggested Captain Jim. Job? It was such a rare thing to find a patient man that when one was really discovered, they were determined he shouldn't be forgotten, retorted Miss Cornelia triumphantly. Anyhow, the virtue doesn't go with the name. There never was such an impatient man born as old Job Taylor over harbor. Well, you know, he had a good deal to try him, Cornelia. Even you can't defend his wife. I always remember what old William McAllister said of her at her funeral. There's nae doot she was a Christian woman, but she had the devil's own temper. I suppose she was trying, admitted Miss Cornelia reluctantly, but that didn't justify what Job said when she died. He rode home from the graveyard the day of the funeral with my father. He never said a word till they got near home. Then he heaved a big sigh and said, You may not believe it, Stephen, but this is the happiest day of my life. Now, wasn't that like a man? I suppose poor old Mrs. Job did make life kind of uneasy for him, reflected Captain Jim. Well, there's such a thing as decency, isn't there? Even if a man is rejoicing in his heart over his wife being dead, he needn't proclaim it to the four winds of heaven. And happy day or not, Job Taylor wasn't long in marrying again, you might notice. His second wife could manage him. She made him walk Spanish. Believe me, the first thing she did was to make him hustle around and put up a tombstone to the first Miss Job, and she had a place left on it for her own name. She said there'd be nobody to make Job put up a monument to her. Speaking of Taylors, how is Mrs. Lewis Taylor up at the Glen, Doctor? Asked Captain Jim. She's getting better slowly, but she has work to do. Hard work, replied Gilbert. Her husband works hard, too, raising prize pigs, said Miss Cornelia. He's noted for his beautiful pigs. He's a heap prouder of his pigs than of his children, but then to be sure, his pigs are the best pigs possible, while his children don't amount to much. He picked a poor mother for them and starved her while she was bearing and rearing them. His pigs got the cream and his children got the skim milk. There are times, Cornelia, when I have to agree with you, though it hurts me, said Captain Jim. That's just exactly the truth about Lewis Taylor. When I see those poor miserable children of his robbed of all children ought to have, it pistons my own bite and sups for days afterwards. Gilbert went out to the kitchen in response to Anne's beckoning. Anne shut the door and gave him a connubial lecture. Gilbert, you and Captain Jim must stop baiting Miss Cornelia. Oh, I've been listening to you, and I just won't allow it. Anne, Miss Cornelia is enjoying herself hugely. You know she is. Well, never mind. You two needn't egg her on like that. Dinner is ready now, and Gilbert, don't let Miss Rachel carve the geese. I know she means to offer to do it, but she doesn't think you can do it properly. Show her you can." "I ought to be able to. I've been studying ABC diagrams of carving for the past month," said Gilbert. "Only don't talk to me while I'm doing it, Anne, for if you drive the letters out of my head, I'll be in a worse predicament than you were in old geometry days when the teacher changed them." Gilbert carved the geese beautifully. Even Miss Rachel had to admit that. And everybody ate of them and enjoyed them. Anne's first Christmas dinner was a great success, and she beamed with housewifely pride. Merry was the feast and long, and when it was over, they gathered around the cheer of the red hearth flame, and Captain Jim told them stories until the red sun swung low over Four Winds Harbor, and the long shadows of the Lombardis fell across the snow in the lane. "I must be getting back to the light," he said finally. "I'll just have time to walk home before sundown. Thank you for a beautiful Christmas, Mistress Blythe. Bring Master Davy down to the light some night before he goes home." "I want to see those stone gods," said Davy with a relish. Chapter 16. New Year's Eve at the Light. The Green Gables folks went home after Christmas, Marilla under solemn covenant to return for a month in the spring. More snow came before New Year's Eve and the harbor froze over, but the Gulf still was free beyond the white, imprisoned fields. The last day of the old year was one of those bright, cold, dazzling winter days which bombarded us with their brilliancy and command our admiration, but never our love. The sky was sharp and blue, and the snow diamonds sparkled insistently. The stark trees were bare and shameless with a kind of brazen beauty. The hills shot assaultingly lances of crystal. Even the shadows were sharp and stiff and clear-cut, as no proper shadows should be. Everything that was handsome seemed 10 times handsomer and less attractive in the glaring splendor, and everything that was ugly seemed 10 times uglier, and everything that was either handsome or ugly. There was no soft bending or kind obscurity or elusive mistiness in that searching glitter. The only things that held their own individuality were the firs, for the fir is the tree of mystery and shadows, and yields never to the encroachments of crude radiance. But finally the day began to realize that she was growing old. Then a certain pensiveness fell over her beauty, which dimmed yet intensified it. Sharp angles, glittering points, melted away into curves and enticing gleams. The white harbor put on soft grays and pinks. The faraway hills turned amethyst. "The old year is going away beautifully," said Anne. She and Leslie and Gilbert were on their way to the Four Winds Point, having plotted with Captain Jim to watch the new year in at the light. The sun had set, and in the southwestern sky hung Venus, glorious and golden, having drawn as near to her earth sister as it's possible for her. For the first time, Anne and Gilbert saw the shadow cast by that brilliant star of evening, that faint, mysterious shadow, never seen save when there is white snow to reveal it, and then only with averted vision, vanishing when you gaze at it directly. "It's like the spirit of a shadow, isn't it?" whispered Anne. "You can see it so plainly haunting your side when you look ahead, but when you turn and look at it, it's gone. I have heard that you can see the shadow of Venus only once in a lifetime, and that within a year of seeing it, your life's most wonderful gift will come to you," said Leslie. But she spoke rather hardly, perhaps thought that even the shadow of Venus could bring her no gift of life. Anne smiled in the soft twilight. She felt quite sure what that mystic shadow promised her. They found Marshall Elliott at the lighthouse. At first, Anne felt inclined to resent the intrusion of this long-haired, long-bearded eccentric into the familiar little circle. But Marshall Elliott soon proved his legitimate claim to membership in the household of Joseph. He was a witty, intelligent, well-read man, rivaling Captain Jim himself in the knack of telling a good story. They were all glad when he agreed to watch the old year out with them. Captain Jim's small nephew Joe had come down to spend New Year's with his great-uncle, and had fallen asleep on the sofa with the first mate curled up in a huge golden ball at his feet. "Ain't he a dear little man?" said Captain Jim gloatingly. "I do love to watch a little child asleep, Mistress Blythe. It's the most beautiful sight in the world, I reckon. Joe does love to get down here for a night because I have him sleep with me. At home he has to sleep with 2 other boys, and he doesn't like it. 'Why can't I sleep with father, Uncle Jim?' says he. 'Everybody in the Bible sleeps with their fathers.' As for the questions he asked, the minister himself couldn't answer them. They fair swamp me. Uncle Jim, if I wasn't me, who would I be? And Uncle Jim, what would happen if God died?" He fired them off at me tonight afore he went to sleep. As for his imagination, it sails away from everything. He makes up the most remarkable yarns, and then his mother shuts him up in the closet for telling stories. And he sits down and makes up another one, and has it ready to relate to her when she lets him out. He had one for me when he came down tonight. "Uncle Jim," says he, solemn as a tombstone, "I had a venture in the glen today." "Yes? What was it?" says I, expecting something quite startling, but nowise prepared for what I really got. "I met a wolf in the street," says he. "Enormous wolf with a big red mouth and awful long teeth. Uncle Jim, I didn't know there were any wolves up at the glen," says I. "Oh, he combed them from far, far away," says Joe, "and I thought he was going to eat me up, Uncle Jim. Were you scared?" says I. "No, 'cause I had a big gun," says Joe, "and I shot that wolf dead. Uncle Jim, solid dead. And then he went up to heaven and bit God," says he. Well, I fair staggered, Mistress Blythe. The hours bloomed into mirth around the driftwood fire. Captain Jim told tales and Marshall Elliott sang old Scotch ballads in a fine tenor voice. Finally, Captain Jim took down his old brown fiddle from the wall and began to play. He had a tolerable knack of fiddling, which all appreciated, save the first mate, who sprang from the sofa as if he had been shot, emitted a shriek of protest, and fled wildly up the stairs. "Can't cultivate an ear for music in that cat nohow," said Captain Jim. "He won't stay long enough to learn to like it." When he got the organ up at the Glen Church, old Elder Richards bounced up from his seat the minute the organist began to play, and scuttled down the aisle and out of the church at the rate of no man's business. It reminded me so strong of the first mate tearing loose as soon as I began the fiddle that I came nearer to laughing out loud in that church than I ever did before or since. There was something so infectious in the rollicking tunes which Captain Jim played that very soon Marshall Elliott's feet began to twitch. He had been a noted dancer in his youth. Presently he started up and held out his hands to Leslie. Instantly she responded. Round and round the firelit room they circled with a rhythmic grace that was wonderful. Leslie danced like one inspired. The wild, sweet abandon of the music seemed to have entered into and possessed her. Anne watched her in a fascinated admiration. She had never seen her like this, and the innate richness and color and charm of her nature seemed to have broken loose and overflowed in crimson cheeks and glowing eyes and a grace of motion. Even the aspect of Marshall Elliott with his long beard and hair could not spoil the picture. On the contrary, it seemed to enhance it. Marshall Elliott looked like a Viking of elder days dancing with one of the blue-eyed, golden-haired daughters of the Northland. "The purtiest dancing I ever saw, and I've seen some in my time," declared Captain Jim, when at last the bow fell from his tired hand. Leslie dropped into her chair, laughing, breathless. "I love dancing," she said apart to Anne. "I haven't danced since I was 16, but I love it. The music seems to run through my veins like quicksilver, and I forget everything, except the delight of keeping time to it. There isn't any floor beneath me or roof over me. I am floating amid the stars." Captain Jim hung the fiddle up in its place beside a large frame, enclosing several banknotes. "Is there anybody else of your acquaintance who can afford to hang his walls with banknotes for pictures?" he asked. "There's $20 notes there, not worth the glass over them. They're old Bank of P.E. Island notes. Had them by me when the bank failed, and I had 'em framed and hung up, partly as a reminder not to put your trust in banks, and partly to give me a real luxurious millionary feeling. Hello, matey. Don't be scared. You can come back now. The music and revelry is over for tonight. The old year has just another hour to stay with us. I've seen 76 New Year Eves come in over that gulf yonder, Mistress Blythe. You'll see 100, said Marshall Elliott. Captain Jim shook his head. No, and I don't want to. At last, I think I don't. Death grows friendlier as we grow older. Not that one of us really wants to die, though, Marshall. Tennyson spoke truth when he said that. There's old Mrs. Wallace up at the Glen. She's had heaps of trouble all her life, poor soul, and she's lost almost everyone she cared about. She's always saying that she'll be glad when her time comes, and she doesn't want to sojourn any longer in this vale of tears. But when she takes a sick spell, there's a fuss. Doctors from town, and a trained nurse, and enough medicine to kill a dog. Life may be a vale of tears, all right, but there are some folks who enjoy weeping, I reckon. They spent the old year's last hour quietly around the fire, and a few minutes before 12, Captain Jim rose and opened the door. We must let the new year in, he said. Outside was a fine blue night. A sparkling ribbon of moonlight garlanded the gulf. Inside the bar, the harbor shone like a pavement of pearl. They stood before the door and waited. Captain Jim with his ripe full experience, Marshall Elliott in his vigorous but empty middle life, Gilbert and Anne with their precious memories and exquisite hopes, Leslie with her record of starved years and her hopeless future. The clock on the little shelf above the fireplace struck 12. Welcome, New Year, said Captain Jim, bowing low as the last stroke died away. I wish you all the best year of your lives, mates. I reckon that whatever the new year brings us will be the best the great captain has for us. And somehow or other, we'll all make port in a good harbor. Well, that concludes our storybook adventure for today. I hope you enjoyed the reading of those 2 chapters. And as always, I look forward to meeting you here next week to continue this wonderful and beautiful storybook adventure with Anne of Green Gables. Be joyful, my friends. Be the joy in everything you do. And remember to hug yourself daily. And know that I love you very much. And I'll see you next week. Bye.